there is, and it all kind of stems from the way I talk about immigration and some other issues too. But there is this kind of like autistic brand of ANCAPs who think that
Aspergo capitalism is what it's
yes,
called.
yes, it's they're good people. I like them. Those are my people.
Good
but
people.
they are phenomenal people. But that seem to think that it's almost like just because you advocate the abolition of the state and because you believe in like private property and the non-aggression principle, that I therefore in a statist world cannot pick between two bad options and the state doing anything. And I try to explain to these people where you're like, well, look, so if you're like, I used to live in the Upper West Side, a very nice neighborhood, pricey neighborhood, a lot of families, kind of quiet for New York City. If the streets are covered in homeless people. It's been worse this year than ever, but it's been a problem for a while. People were complaining about it when I lived there pre-COVID, for a while. Homeless people all over the streets. Now, I have absolutely no problem with the police making them leave. Like, I have no problem with that. Now, you could make some libertarian argument and go, but they're nonviolent and they're just standing there and this is a man with a gun coming in and making them leave. And you're like, okay, yes, but look, if they didn't rob all of us to force us to pay for these roads, to pay for these parks, and then build them there, the libertarian position isn't none of these would exist. The libertarian position is that we would voluntarily pay for it on our own. There would still be roads and streets and parks. And in that scenario, what do you think the odds are that we would allow homeless people to just hang out here? So you can say that, like, we want the state to do nothing, right? But when the state robs you, creates these parks, builds these roads, and then allows homeless people on them, that's still doing something. Like, that's also doing something, claiming a monopoly on your security force and then not securing anything. And if I have to choose between a homeless person being, forced to leave or my daughter seeing people pissing and shooting up heroin on her walk to school, I choose them being told to leave. Like, I'm sorry, there's nothing contradicting being a libertarian anarchist about that. It's just out of two bad situations, I like this one better than that one.
Yeah, if the state seizes for itself the duty or the right or the obligation, whatever you call it, to provide security and prevents individuals from privately implementing that, I would rather they actually did it in as peaceable a manner as possible than that they proclaim themselves this right and then not do it. I mean, here's an example. Like, we do not want government producing food, because we know that's going to lead to famine. But if the government seized all the farms, I would much rather them try to be as productive as possible than say, yeah, we're not going to do anything. So the problem is, whenever they try to do anything, it always ends up with distortions. And what those distortions mean when it comes to security is extreme violence, innocent people being killed, murderous people not being convicted, so on and so forth. But yeah, the other thing is, people seem to have a very and I see this with Twitter and my polls all the time, people seem to have a very difficult capacity to make ranked choices. And it's just like, these all suck. And it's like, listen, if you're an anarchist and someone said, here are 10 government programs, which do you want to get rid of first? And you're like, all of them, they all suck. I find that to be a position I have very little respect for. Because if the choices are between the ATF and food stamps, I would prefer food stamps are private. I think it encourages people to have unhealthy eating habits. I remember I was in the supermarket and someone behind me was paying with food stamps and she was buying Oreos. And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, the whole point of food stamps is that you're not starving. It's not that you're eating like sugary lard. And perfectly well, Nabisco has their lobbyists who are saying, look, it's not fair that people who are, food insecure don't have access to dessert. And that congressman's like, I'm going to make sure Oreos are on this list of things you could buy in food stamps.
Okay. Well, first, I'm probably going to play that clip back and stop it. I wanted to play it in full. I wanted to play it in full first. Because I think there's so many misunderstandings there. But first, this what is it? NYX makeup for drugstore makeup. It's cheap as hell. It's as good as some of the most expensive stuff I got. This is one of the best eyeshadow primers. NYX Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Highly recommend it. These brushes, I don't even remember. I think I got them on Wish. Perfect for the curve. See how it's got that like little curve in it? Perfect for cheeks. And I just wanted to be sure I showed you guys that. Okay. Now, here's, you might be wondering, what's the larger context of this disagreement I have with Dave here? It's on the issue of no particular orderism. I've done a lot on no particular orderism, so I'm not going to go into it all here. When I chop this up and re-release it, I'll put a card up that has the link to the big explanation I did about my disagreement with Dave on no particular orderism. But I think there's a confusion here. They, I think, keep confusing having a preference. Everyone has preferences in what order they would like to see the state dismantled. I don't think any, I hate saying any because there's always some nuts out there. So when I say any, I mean reasonable, like the vast majority of anarchists or libertarians don't have a preference. And I don't think any of them demonize having a preference. But he then says something very reasonable like that, and then kind of conjoins it with the rest of his issues of what the police should be doing now or what the state should be doing now. And I think here I'm stumbling over myself a little bit, that it confuses the issue. And it might not be entirely clear. So I would like to replay that clip, and I'm going to start and stop it and provide commentary. I just wanted it to be in context first, but let's go back to
there is, and it all kind of stems from the way I talk about immigration and some other issues too. But
okay, the reason why I know he's kind of connecting these issues, even though in this short clip it seems like he might not be, is because he mentioned the way he deals with immigration. His position on immigration is that we cannot open the borders until we first dismantle the welfare state. I totally get into how I disagree with that in the card that I just put up. But that's not the same thing as what he's addressing here, and he just conflated the two. The whole immigration thing, and a lot of libertarians agree with him, that we can't open the borders till we dismantle the welfare state. I call that Stockholm libertarianism, because each side of this issue has a hostage, the welfare state and the borders, and neither of them are going to release their hostage. So you have a game of chicken in which no one's going to blink, and they both get to evade responsibility by blaming it on the other person. Nice work if you can get it. I don't think that's effective libertarianism. But that's not what we're dealing with here, okay? So let's continue.
There is this kind of like autistic brand of ANCAPs who think that
Aspergo capitalism is what.
And I'm an Aspergo capitalist, guilty as charged. I have autism, so okay. I think it is a lot of us. I think it's even a little bit of you and Michael Malice too, Dave. Don't put yourself above it. But anyway, autists of the world unite. Proud anarcho. What do you say? Whatever. I already forgot it. Aspergo anarcho, or he said, whatever. Doesn't matter. It was a joke. Let's continue.
Yes, it's they're good people. I like them. Those are my people.
Good people.
they are phenomenal people. But that seem to think that it's almost like just because you advocate the abolition of the state and because you believe in like private property and the non-aggression principle, that I therefore in a statist world cannot pick between two bad options and the state doing anything.
Okay, that's where I think he's just mischaracterized the argument that his opponents have with him. Nobody is saying in a statist world, or at least nobody reasonable, again, Spurgo capitalist, yeah. That's definitely me. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, if you're wondering why I'm looking from here to here, I have a little comment screen here. Nobody is saying that when you're stuck in a status world and things are happening, that you're to just throw up your hands, make yourself a victim, and saying, because I don't believe in the state, in the perfect utopia, that I don't think the state should do anything now. Nobody is saying that. That's a straw man. Everybody has a preference. Now, some libertarians might be a little bit more autistic than others and kind of judge you a bit more for picking a solution, but everybody realizes that. We all have to do it. We're all using resources. The roads are paid for by stolen money. Does that mean we don't drive? Libertarianism is not a suicide pact in a statist world. So let's continue, because I think he has strawmanned a bit here.
Try to explain to these people where you're like, well, look, if you're like, I used to live in the Upper West Side, a very nice neighborhood, pricey neighborhood, a lot of families, kind of quiet for New York City. If the streets are covered in homeless people, it's been worse this year than ever, but it's been a problem for a while.
Okay, well, first I want to explain to you guys, I always use guides for my eyeshadow. I have been blessed with both severely hooded and somewhat downturned eyes. Makes it so difficult to get decent shadow that looks good once you open your eyes. You do it with your eyes shut. It looks wonderful. When you have hooded eyes and downturned eyes, you open it and all of a sudden it goes. So that's why I use guides. Now he's talking about a homeless problem in a Tony neighborhood that he used to live in. Homeless people were on the public, they were in tents in the public area. And that raises a whole question, a libertarian question. Is that okay? Because, public property shouldn't, there should be no such thing as public property, but they're citizens of the country. Can they just stick their tent there? What are the rights of the property owners around this public property for this nuisance that is happening around them? It's very complex. I agree. But he didn't say there should be absolutely no such thing as public property. I don't actually believe that as an anarchist, believe it or not. I think going way back into the clouds of time, I agree with Roderick Long on this, that there is something of a public right of way, that you have to be able to travel. So there are public lanes and things like that, but those are meant for travel, not for pitching tents. So it's somewhat irrelevant here. I just wanted to bring that up to open one's mind to that idea. And that's why you can't encircle somebody in their property, the whole donut problem. But here, with these public, maybe parks, larger areas, the homeless people have just as much a right to use it as the people in the property around. So where are the limits? What can be imposed? This just raises the whole problem with having public property, because you are in some way then going to have to limit its use by people who, as members of the quote-unquote public, have just as much right to it. He later will go on to argue that he guesses the homeowners have paid more into the theft pool, in which the public areas are paid for, so he thinks they have a greater right. I don't know how he gets to that conclusion, because A, he doesn't know what kind of taxes these homeless people may have paid earlier in their lives. He doesn't know what kind of inheritance that they may have been robbed of from wealthier parents that paid into it, that could have passed that wealth down to them, so that there's all kinds of ways that everyone can have rights to this area. It's not simply the taxes you are paying today. The question becomes, what can or cannot be limited? I think we all can agree that aggression in those public areas should not be allowed. But he's starting off not with aggression. He's starting off with things like eyesores. I do not want to see these tents in my Tony neighborhood. But is that legitimate from a libertarian point of view? Does he have a right to that? Does he have a right to ask the force of the state to remove those tents? Are they aggressing? So here's the whole question here. But I don't think anybody denies that we should be having these discussions. And if it were, in fact, aggression, since the state has appropriated for itself the right to your self-defense, that it's wrong to call the state. But let's continue. Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse here a second.
Were complaining about it when I lived there pre-COVID, for a while. Homeless people all over the streets. Now, I have absolutely no problem with the police making them leave. Like, I have no problem.
You have no problem with that, really? Okay, why? On what grounds? If they're just there. So far, he hasn't mentioned any aggression. And so he has no problem. Now, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with him having no problem with that, because I haven't yet heard the libertarian grounds for removing them. And every interaction with the police, as we just so graphically saw, is a potential for violence, particularly with people who are viewed as less than, which the homeless often are. And the homeless often, might have some psychological problems that could cause a misunderstanding with the police. Now, of course, some might say, well, that's exactly why they should be removed from my neighborhood. I don't want these, people with perhaps mental issues in my neighborhood. But do they lose rights to exist? Your neighbors might be more mentally your neighbors with lots of money living in a beautiful mansion could have more psychological problems and be a bigger danger to you. And answer Carolyn asks, who are these? The dark-haired gentleman is Dave Smith of Part of the Problem, and the lighter-haired gentleman is Michael Malice, who is his guest often. And the show, I think, was entitled The Malice of the State. I adore both of these people. Michael Malice is like shit poster extraordinaire. But let's continue.
That. Now, you could make some libertarian argument and go, but they're nonviolent and they're just standing there and this is a man with a gun coming in and making them leave. And you're like, okay, yes, but look, if they did...
Okay, yes, but? That is a libertarian argument. There's a man with a gun telling them to leave and they're just standing there. Okay, let's see how you're going to justify this, Dave.
Rob all of us, to force us to pay for these roads, to pay for these parks, and then build them there. The libertarian position isn't none of these would exist. The libertarian position is that we would voluntarily pay for it on our own. There would still be roads and streets and parks. And in that scenario, what do you think the odds are that we would allow homeless people to just hang out here?
But that's different. Just because there would be an analog to having parks and things like that, and what would those look like, because they'd be owned in a different way, is somewhat irrelevant to what they are now, because it's an analog. It's not exactly the same. And when you say this we, Dave, who is this we you're talking about? Because you and I are both libertarians, and I've already disagreed with you thinking it's perfectly okay to ask the cops to come to just take a peaceful homeless person out. So obviously we do not agree. And if you're saying, if I were your neighbor and we've both equally paid into this property, if you can somehow prove that, who wins? It's the whole same thing argument with the border. Why, if I want to hire somebody from Mexico, why are you telling me I can't? So it's kind of the same thing here. He just made a generalization, like, obviously, we all none of us would. No, you don't know that. And you can't make apples to apples here.
So you can say that, we want the state to do nothing, right? But when the state robs you, creates these parks, builds these roads, and then allows homeless people on them.
Okay. This is where it gets into straw man territory. Because he's kind of like equivocating, and here I'm putting in my wing using the guides, because otherwise with my whatchamacallit, my hooded eyes, I wouldn't be able to do this. And yes, I know some people are going to start reeing because I'm using a Jeffree Star palette, blood sugar. I know Jeffree Star's very questionable human being right now, but this is already paid for. I am not so stupid to think that throwing this in the garbage as some kind of protest against Jeffree Star being a shitty human being is going to do a damn thing socially. I'm going to use the pretty makeup. Plus, he makes good makeup. Sorry. Not sorry. So, I'm going to use it. I've had this for a while. Okay, so let's continue.
That's still doing something. Like that's also doing something, claiming a monopoly on your security force and then not securing anything. And if I have to choose between a homeless person being, like forced to leave or my daughter seeing people pissing and shooting up heroin on her.
Okay, that was a jump, wasn't it? He went from homeless people living in tents to homeless people pissing and shooting up heroin. Now, pissing out in the open and all over the place because of the potential public health hazard, that could be considered aggression. I wouldn't have a problem with stopping them from doing that. But of course, what we don't understand here, or it's not coming into play here, I don't know his neighborhood. I don't know if there's nearby businesses. But a lot of times, homeless people are forced to do that because no one will let them in to use bathrooms in businesses because we have no fucking compassion. Homeless people shooting up heroin. Are they all doing this? I don't know if they are. Are they doing it out openly on the streets? I don't know. That turns somewhat into a gray area, to be honest with you, as from a libertarian. In the world we live in now, obviously that's illegal, so he can call the cops on that. He obviously, like me, doesn't believe that using heroin should be illegal. So what is then the big think of the children? I don't want my daughter to see this. If in Libertopia, Dave, heroin would be legal, do you similarly shield your daughter's eyes from somebody drinking beer? Like, I'm not saying there isn't potentially an argument to be made here that there is a qualitative difference, that you don't want your daughter to see this rather than that. There's lots of things, if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her to see. It doesn't entitle me to call the cops on them. It puts a greater responsibility upon me, maybe to explain to my daughter or make some kind of arrangements where she wouldn't see these things. Get her in the car, make sure the windows are up, distract her with something else. But just because you don't want your daughter to see something doesn't give you the right to use aggression against somebody. I'm waiting to see your argument for how the homeless person is an aggressor. They certainly are breaking the law if they're shooting up heroin. But I want to hear the libertarian argument for them being an aggressor against your daughter, to the fact that you can send someone with a gun to remove them. I just don't see that yet. I think what we do see is the problem of public property. And I would say, actually, you might be impeding moving towards a more libertarian solution of public property by artificially diminishing the problem by using illegitimate force to hide it.
Walk to school, I choose them being told to leave. Like, I'm sorry, there's nothing contradicting being a libertarian anarchist about that. It's just, out of two bad situations, I like this one better than that one.
Yeah, if the state...
Again, here's the equivocation. It isn't merely two bad situations. It's you using state aggression against a homeless person for doing something that you haven't yet proved is aggression, that you just don't personally like. Sorry, that's not a bad situation in a libertarian justification. Really? Your daughter seeing something you don't like justifies potentially killing a homeless person. Because remember, all laws are enforced. The minute you call the police on somebody, you should be okay with, if things get out of control, them dying for that. You're okay with that? I don't think this is two bad situations in a libertarian context. If it were two equally bad situations in a libertarian context, I do agree. There's nothing unlibertarian by choosing one that you prefer. Everyone has preferences. But you need to make sure you're not being an aggressor at the same time. And I'm not convinced yet in this scenario, Dave, if you call the police on those homeless people, that you're not being an aggressor.
Seizes for itself the duty or the right or the obligation, whatever you call it, to provide security and prevents individuals from privately implementing that, I would rather they actually did it in as peaceable a manner as possible than that they proclaim themselves this right and then not do it. I mean, I mean, here's an example. Like,
Okay, let's stop there. I agree with Michael Malice, but what they're presuming here in this discussion is that there was an aggression occurring. And if there's an aggression occurring, then obviously, since we can't defend our rights ourselves, the police have taken that right to themselves. We would prefer that they do it well, obviously. But that just presumes in this whole context here that there was a right to call the police, and I don't think that's been demonstrated yet.
Not want government producing food because we know that's going to lead to famine. But if the government seized all the farms, I would much rather them try to be as productive as possible than say, yeah, we're not going to do anything. So the problem is whenever they try to do anything, it always ends up with distortions. And what those distortions mean when it comes to security is extreme violence, innocent people being killed, murderous people not being convicted, so on and so forth.
And I see there's some comments coming by on this. I will get to them. I just want to finish through this. I'm not so sure I picked the right colors. I kind of do this at random. I'm going with like a purple and orange here, and I'm going to splash in some pink. Again, the assumption was made that an actual aggression has occurred, and again, needs to be proven. Has not yet been proven.
The other thing is people seem to have a very and I see this with Twitter and my polls all the time. People seem to have a very difficult capacity to make ranked choices, and it's just like these all suck. And it's like, listen, if you're an anarchist and someone said, here are 10 government programs, which do you want to get rid of first? And you're like, all of them, they all suck. I find that to be a position I have very little respect for.
And I agree with him there. I saw this happen in the hypothetical polls of if you had no choice, or your choice was, if you don't make a choice, you're going to get shot in the head, something really ridiculous, would you have voted for Biden or Trump? And then you have the libertarians who just want to virtue signal and go, neither. Really? You die for that? Okay. I think it's an interesting discussion to have. If you had to pick one or the other, what would you pick and why? The people who just stubbornly just refuse to answer that question is just bizarre to me.
Because the choices are between the ATF and food stamps. Yeah, I would prefer food stamps are private. I think it encourages people to have unhealthy eating habits. I remember I was in the supermarket.
Okay. So he had said, if the choice is between the ATF, getting rid of the ATF or getting rid of food stamps, I'd get rid of the ATF. I think everybody would say that. But here's the thing in life. It's not coming out so bad now that I just need to blend it, I think. Rarely do we have such choices. The way life works is through a confluence of circumstances, an opportunity presents itself to get rid of something. It might not be something you think is even terribly important. I mean, it's part of the state. If you had your fantasy way of ordering it, it would be way down there in your list of priorities, but that is irrelevant because the opportunity is now to get rid of it. You don't pass up that opportunity because you'd rather do something first when that other thing you'd rather do first isn't even on the table. So the choice ends up being get rid of this or don't get rid of anything. That is where they're conflating things. Obviously, if I had a choice, get rid of the ATF or get rid of food stamps, I'd get rid of the ATF. But what if the choice was, we have an opportunity to get rid of food stamps? Do we do it or not? And if you start hemming and hawing, saying there are more important things to get rid of, but they're not on the table, the only thing that's on the table to get rid of right now is that is where no particular orderism comes in. You don't hold one positive reform hostage to another. Because he talked about distortion of the market. And the funny thing is, in calling the police against people, non-aggressive people, in order to remove an eyesore, something you'd rather your daughter not seeing, you are distorting the situation by hiding it. When in fact, forcing it out into the open, letting everyone see there's really nothing you can do about it, might bring about change faster than if you distorted it by using force where it was inappropriate.
And someone behind me was paying with food stamps, and she was buying Oreos, and I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, the whole point of food stamps is that you're not starving. It's not that you're eating like sugary lard. And you know perfectly well, Nabisco has their lobbyists who are saying, look, it's not fair that people who are, food insecure don't have access to dessert. And that congressman's like, yeah, I'm going to make sure Oreos are on this list of things you can.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. They did get into an interesting discussion after this that I didn't include on should a libertarian support restrictions on food stamps that say you can only buy it for like actual healthy foods and not Oreos. And Dave made the libertarian argument for both sides. One side being, well, if I've got to pay for their health care, then I have the right to say they should only use this money, which is stolen from me, to buy healthy foods. I don't think that argument has any merit. Just because in a different area you're paying for something, and just because the government has stolen from you to provide funds for food, does not give you the right to be daddy to these people. And you shouldn't be asking the state to do it either, because ultimately everyone's paying for something for you, in which your freedom choices might be causing to be more expensive, and you don't want them using that logic against you either. I do not think it's particularly libertarian to say it can only be used for certain things because it might cost me more elsewhere. Dave, you having children is costing the people in your neighborhood who are getting taxed more, because they have to pay for it through their property taxes and they don't have any children. So does that mean then it'd be okay that you have to get permission from all your neighbors to have children? I mean, we like to think that our choices aren't costing other people money because we're not on welfare, or not obviously on welfare. Let me tell you something, dear libertarian, we are all on the government teat. Unwillingly, but we are all sucking off that titty, okay? So be careful before you're looking down on other people, because the government's made it so that we're all helpless in some way, or all dependent in some way. Okay, I want to go to the next clip now that, oh no, I wanted to look at comments. I gotta find my glasses and then go to the next clip. So now I've got to get my little thing here. Michelle, just on the Jeffree Star thing, says that I have 3 of his palettes. I think I have 2 of his palettes. They are high quality. So I use it. And you want to know what? I don't know half of that controversy. And the things that have to do with victimizing other people and his back and forth over Dabby Vanity, where Dabby Vanity was, exploiting young children, that I obviously care about. The other things like that's going on in his life with the battles with him and Shane and Tati, I don't give a shit. Michelle also said, and I'm going to put these on the screen, I am sure there are other more libertarian actions that can be taken to redirect homeless people to another area that doesn't require having to get police involved. Absolutely. I mean, police should be the last resort and save for actual aggression, not inconvenience. Bill says, excellent point. Parents have a responsibility to educate their children. He's almost taken the state as the party line. And also have a responsibility to protect their children. And even though the government has taken the ultimate stance of like protecting, there are still certain protections you can do. Again, if this is something he really believes would be very, very harmful for his daughter to see, there are ways he can prevent his daughter from seeing it that don't involve using state aggression against the homeless. Michelle says fundraising or other voluntary charitable activity to help them. Anything but preemptively calling the police when no actual crime has been committed. That's exactly it. And if an actual crime is being committed, then the fact that they're homeless is completely irrelevant. It could be anybody. If there's an actual crime being committed, then fine. But when there's not, there's not. See, Bill's given the opposite opinion. I disagree. That in the 70s, the food stamps could only buy certain types of food. I think granting just because we're being stolen from, I don't think we should grant the right to government to tell people what they can eat. I just think that's a dangerous gun that will be used against us. Okay, so going on to the next one. Let's see, because I kind of got off order here by doing that twice. So let's go here.
But I think our role is to always be pushing back toward the North Star. You don't want to get lost in these battles and then become Milton Friedman, just spending your whole career pushing for, a negative income tax or school vouchers and forgetting that the end goal is to get the government out of all of this, and that would be so you always want to keep promoting anarchy and libertarianism and all of these things, but there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, but short of getting there, I'd prefer this to that, or this is an important, decision to make within this, the realm of the world we're actually living in.
Okay, I think he thinks that people, one second, can't talk while I'm doing a little bit of a wing here. And notice I'm doing it on the paper. Again, what he said is perfectly reasonable, but the way he's presenting it is as if anybody would disagree. Maybe a few would, but in general, I don't think I, as a person who generally disagrees with him on a lot of these issues, don't disagree. We always need to be pointing to the North Star. That's something that the National Party needs to learn, because that's been my complaint with the National Party, is they're acting as if these little interim measures are libertarian. They might be on the road to more libertarian solution, to libertarianism, but they are not the end goal in itself. And I don't think anyone disagrees there. Very few libertarians, even though we keep hearing about this boogeyman, are all or nothing. Like, if I can't have anarchy tomorrow, I don't want to have any positive reform. I've never met a person like that, though I keep hearing about them, and I've met a lot of people.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business, not because they want to